If you could choose six historical figures to put in the Hall of Evil, who would you pick? Paul Kengor got to pick some for Prager University, and we're going to talk about that today. Welcome to the Weekend Spectator. My name is Grace Reilly, and I'm joined by the amazing Paul Kengor. Paul, it's great to be with you.
The great and gracious Grace. Good to be with you again.
So great to be with you. So, to start, we just want to give an intro to this series, which is worth checking out. Prager University does excellent work and kind of doubling as representing the Institute for Faith and Freedom and the American Spectator. Paul Kengor, Marxism expert, was able to pick six dictators, communist leaders that have wreaked havoc on their countries and society and the world generally, and break down the impact that they had. And he's going to go through how this came about to start, and then we're going to talk a bit about the actual content of them. So first, how did this come about? How did you get connected with Prager U?
Yeah, so I first did a Prager U video. Oh man, was it 2017, 2018? I think we called it Who Was the Real Karl Marx,
Ideas
right?
have consequences, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and sometimes catastrophic, like the ideas of Karl Marx. Born in Trier, Germany in 1818, Marx didn't invent communism, but it was on his ideas that Lenin and Stalin built the Soviet Union, Mao built communist China, and innumerable other tyrants, from the Kims in North Korea to the Castros in Cuba, built their communist regimes. Ultimately, those regimes and movements calling themselves Marxist murdered about 100 million people and enslaved more than a billion.
Right. I had written a piece for the Wall Street Journal, and the Prager U people saw it. They already knew me, already knew who I was, reached out to me, and they said, "Yeah, we think this would make a great commentary." I said, "Great." And so they came to Pittsburgh, which is my hometown. So I'm here in Grove City College right now. Pittsburgh's about an hour south. And I probably shouldn't mention this on camera, but I'll say it anyway. I don't think I had ever seen a Prager U video before. I mean, maybe, kind of here and there. And I knew about him, and I'm just somebody who doesn't really watch videos and that kind of thing. So I thought, it's like the day before, Grace, I thought I should check out a few of these and see what they're like, right? So I could kind of get prepped for an idea of what I'm going to do. And I watched a few of them, and I thought, wow, these are really good, right? I mean, this
Super
is
impressive.
yeah, now I can see why people are so impressed. I knew that the influence that they had, the kind of views that they had. So we did that. They came to Pittsburgh. I didn't want to go to LA, and they said, "That's okay, we'll come to Pittsburgh," right? And then when I saw what they did in Pittsburgh, they rented the studio, they hired this crew, they brought in all these people. Then I said to Alan Estrin, who's the amazing producer of Prager, this guy's amazing. And I said, I feel really bad. You guys all came here to do this, right? And he said, that's okay. We like Pittsburgh. Sometimes we move the operation. We do different things. So we did it. And that Karl Marx video, man, that got millions of hits, millions of views. Yeah, on Prager U, on YouTube, right? Affiliated with that. So it worked really
You could
well.
crown him. They should have done another video on him because he should be crowned the king of the Hall of Evil, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
in
he
fact,
inspired the people that are on it.
yeah, and in fact, I even said to Alan Estrin and the others, I said, so we could do a whole series just on Karl Marx, right? I mean, Marx has done so many different things. About that time, I was working on The Devil and Karl Marx, which became my book. It came out around 2020. I said we should do something on Marx's anti-Semitism, Marx's racism. I had all these different ideas, but they liked working with me. They enjoyed how this turned out, so they said we're going to work again. Don't worry about it. So they contacted me about a year ago, Alan Estrin and the others, and they said, we want to do a dictator series. And I said, oh, I love it, right? Cool idea. We want to do several of these. And again, Grace, I said, great, but I'm not going to California, all right? I don't want to go to Los Angeles. They said, it's okay, we'll come to you.
You could have stopped by the Reagan Ranch.
Right, exactly. I've been to California a lot. I mean, I went to
California. You probably spent
California
enough time there in the Reagan Library and everything.
every other summer. I was in California, right, going back to about the year 2000. So they said, we'll come to you. And they brought, so they rented this studio in Pittsburgh off of Route 279 in Pittsburgh. And again, I mean, these people are so impressive. They are pure LA Hollywood, right? They know what they're doing. We had a day, we picked six dictators. I'll get to that in a minute on how we picked them. And I wrote the original scripts, which were all kind of, about 900 words. And I would shoot for the first one. Alan felt I missed certain things. I said, all right, I'll make them all about 1,200 words, and then you cut out stuff that you don't want, right? So we made them about 900 some words each. And then we kind of finessed those. And then we had a day where we met in Pittsburgh where we just did basically, sorry, my earplug keeps popping out. We basically worked on scripting and rehearsing and going over and over again. So we kind of got all those down on the first day. And then we had like 3 days after that to record 6 of them. And we really knocked them out in about a day and a half, right? 2 days, using a teleprompter and everything. And I would sometimes, Grace, try to ad lib, change a word, do something for emphasis. And Alan would kindly say, don't do that. Stick to the script, right? Because they had it exactly the way they wanted it, exactly the way they put it together. And as far as choosing the 6, we initially had 5.
Actually, yeah, and go over what the 6 were.
Yeah. So Alan said, all right, I've got 5 on my list. Give me your 5. Who you think I have? And I said, all right, Hitler, Stalin, Mao. He's like, yep, exactly. And I said, Pol Pot. He's like, yes, Pol Pot, Pol Pot. He said, how about the 5th? And I said, all right, I know how you and I think, right? And I know people won't like this, but I think it should include Fidel Castro. And he's like, bingo, right? They're going to scream when we pick Castro. And then at one point, and you'll get this, having taken my Marxism courses and everything, one of my complaints always is people leave Lenin off the list, right? And I don't know if it was Alan or me first, or maybe both said about the same time. We said, we can't leave Lenin off the list. I mean, Lenin leads to Stalin,
He
right?
got the ball rolling for all of
He got the ball
rolling for Stalin, which of course impacted Mao later and so much else. So he absolutely should be included and covered.
Yeah, I mean, he takes Marx's ideas, becomes known as Marxism-Leninism. Bolsheviks take over in 1917. He and his cadre, Trotsky, Bukharin, Stalin. It was Lenin that built the concentration camps, created NKVD, Cheka, KGB, the police state, banished freedom of press, assembly, religion, everything. I mean, Lenin was just a thug, a monster, a hater in many ways. Lenin was more vicious than Stalin. And
he absolutely laid the groundwork for everything that Stalin was able to do.
Yeah, for a while there was in the academy, right, in higher ed, this kind of, they called it the good Lenin, bad Stalin myth. Oh, if only Lenin had lived, then all this killing wouldn't have happened. Our good friend Richard Pipes, who we had here at Grove City College, probably about 20 years ago at this point, he blew all of that up when he went through the Lenin papers in the Soviet archives in the 1990s, found all these blood-curdling directives from Lenin, vitriolic rhetoric, just hate-filled, nasty stuff. And it became clear that Lenin could have died, turned this over to anybody, and there would have been, and had Lenin lived, I mean, Lenin was already killing people by hundreds of thousands. So just awful. So we included Lenin, and then we ended up releasing Lenin first, kind of chronologically, right? Lenin and then Stalin. I guess we are doing them now that I think of it. Lenin and then Stalin and then Hitler and then Mao. And as we're recording here right now, this week, Fidel Castro came up. And then our final one is going to be the absolutely abominable evil, and somebody who wouldn't make on a lot of Hall of Evil lists, Pol Pot. And by the way, that term right there, so we were calling it the Dictator series. And about 4 or 5 months ago, so we recorded these last June, I think it was. About 3 or 4 months ago, this would have been maybe December, January, the Prager U people got in contact with me. They said, we've decided to call this series the Hall of Evil rather than the Dictator series. I said, oh man, that's perfect, right? You guys, you know what you're doing. Hall of Evil is perfect. So it's out now. And so far, all the ones that we've released have gotten over 1 million hits pretty quickly, just in the first week on the Prager U site alone.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And so what are some of the biggest, I guess, just to go into the topic, some of the biggest takeaways or kind of commonalities, obviously, from the Marxist ideology and the communist ideology that were woven through all of these different leaders in society? So, for example, one would be the mass killing. What are some of the biggest commonalities that come out of the series?
That's a great question. Now think about this. The only real commonality that I can see among the six, and this would be five out of the six, was communism, right? So five out of the six were communists.
And of course,
And
communism and what was it? The most evil, destructive uh leaders and leaderships over these societies, completely destroyed the countries, the societies, and with that being the commonality, I mean, it's wild that people still try to argue that communism can be a good thing.
yeah, in fact, Martin Malia, Stéphane Courtois, in the Black Book of Communism, which was published by Harvard University Press at the end of the 20th century, they said that wherever communism went, it led to a level of destruction and killing and murder unlike anything ever theretofore ever seen in the history of these countries and cultures. They had never seen anything like this before, and it wasn't unique to like Russia, right? Eastern Europe, Africa, Latin America, Asia. Like, oh, this is a Asia thing. They're prone to that kind of violence in that part of the world. Not at all. Right? No, the one commonality is communism. So wherever it goes, you have these massive killing fields that the people in these countries had never before experienced. And the one exception of the six would be Hitler wasn't a communist. He hated communists, but he was a socialist, a national socialist, right? It was the national Nazi was short for National Socialist German Workers' Party. Actually, it's short for National Socialist Nazi, right? But the full name of the party was National Socialist German Workers' Party. So, I mean, people all call Hitler a right winger. How many right wingers do you know who are part of the Socialist Workers' Party, right?
Well, yeah, and to drive that point home further, obviously the Soviet Union, they started, so the leaders there started off like was it Lenin or Stalin that called himself a democratic socialist before then, after taking power, changed the label of the party to communism, and obviously, socialist is in the name of the USSR too.
That's right. And in fact, in 1903, and by the way, I'm saying this while Isaac White, one of our producers, is in the room, and he talked about Lenin yesterday in our class, right,
Oh,
Isaac?
good job. He got
But
an A, I
yeah,
bet.
but they so I'm well briefed thanks to Isaac's presentation in class yesterday. Richard Pipes talks a lot about this in his Communism: A History. When the Bolsheviks were first created, it was in January 1903, and it was a conference in January 1903, and they split between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, but they were the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. So they call themselves Social Democrats, not even Democratic Socialists, right? Which is what they are in America today. The Democrat Socialists of America, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, that whole group.
I think
But they
they
were Social
want to like
Democrats.
try. I mean, what's so interesting is in the United States, when they're using that label, they're using it to distinguish themselves away from socialism, to create that divide, to say, no, 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 we're not talking about that awful socialism, communism that's been responsible for the death of over 100 million people. We're talking about democratic socialism. But what's
Right.
interesting is obviously democratic socialism is a tainted label too. But I guess they just assume that since schools don't teach that anymore, no one will pick up on it and know that.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, and in fact, and then even the milder ones will say, "I'm not even a democratic socialist. I'm a social democrat." You'd be like, "Oh, like the Bolsheviks,
Exactly.
right? Like Lenin and those guys, or National Socialists, like Hitler." So, to be fair, right, these words over time have different meanings, and in fact, Germany today, the Christian Democrats before they've been social democrats. That was a form of milder social democracy. And I point out that in Western Europe today, the social democrats are usually okay. It's typically the democratic socialists who are the socialists, right? But yeah, these words have meaning, and USSR stood for United Soviet Socialist Republics. So the one thing that all six of them have in common is socialism, right? And according to Marxist-Leninist theory, Marx wrote this, Engels wrote this, Lenin wrote this in his State and Revolution, 1917. So what Lenin said, what is the difference between socialism and communism? Socialism leads to communism.
And it's
So
the
there would be
goal.
this,
Communism
it's
is
the
the
goal.
goal of socialism.
That's right. That's cool. So throughout history, the dialectic would go from the dialectic of history. You would go from slavery to feudalism to capitalism to socialism to communism. Right. The
Yeah.
kind of final step to Marion Smith of Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation used to say, as the Christian aspires to heaven, right, the socialist aspires to communism. That's at least according to Marx, Engels, and Lenin, and Marxism-Leninism. So back to your question, the commonality, socialism with all 6 of them. At the very least, 5 out of 6 of them, hardcore communists. That would be Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Castro, and Pol Pot.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And I would love to know, kind of as we wrap up, something that stuck out to me through this. It's just kind of remembering, especially being a recent, even just I'll say high school graduate. Obviously, I'm out of college now, but I just remember from high school and middle school and elementary, a common thing is that they really don't focus on communism or on these most of the leaders that you've chosen for this Hall of Evil. Schools spend a lot of time on Hitler and the Holocaust, as they should, but they really don't get into these communist leaders who were obviously responsible for so much death and destruction in the same way and at the same level. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, students everywhere should be watching the videos that you've put together for Prager U. And I wish that schools would use that resource because I just remember, and I know that it's definitely true across the country, that they really do not teach much about communism or socialism.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest killer of them all was Mao. According to the Black Book of Communism, 60-some million deaths. More recent research on Mao, it may be over 70 million. The Black Book says only like 20, 25 million under the Soviet Union. But Alexander Yakovlev's Yale University Press book, A Century of Violence in Soviet Russia, Yakovlev was given the job by Gorbachev after the fall of the Berlin Wall to count the skulls. He said Stalin alone annihilated 60 to 70 million people. Pol Pot in Cambodia, they killed 1 to maybe as high as 3 million people, probably about at least 2 million people out of a total population of 5 to 7 million in just 4 years. Really more like 3 years in the 1970s, which would make Pol Pot the greatest killer ever in terms of sheer percentage of population. And one more, Alan Estrin and I and the Prager U people knew that we would get pushback on Fidel Castro, right? The American left, oh, go to Castro's Cuba for free education and healthcare, right?
You've got the leftist college students marching with Castro and Che Guevara shirts on, rah rah Guevara,
yeah.
It's crazy.
And none of them want to immigrate there. And about 125,000 people have attempted the swim from Cuba to Florida since 1959. According to the Black Book of Communism, at least 40,000 drowned. You know how many Americans have tried to swim to Havana in Cuba? Zero.
Zero.
Right?
And this makes me think too of, so a few years ago, I worked for an organization called Young Americans Against Socialism for about
great
a
group.
year. Yes, and we interviewed a man, his name was Ray, and he windsurfed from Cuba to the United States, and he shared his story. I'll put something on the screen here so you can look into that if you want. It was done by Young Americans Against Socialism. But it's insane to hear the testimonies of people who have actually done stuff like that, tried to swim, windsurf away from Cuba, and like the things that people do, how bad it is, and how ignorant so many are here in the United States that are advocating for exactly what so many people flee. And yeah, it's true. You don't see
He's lucky he didn't drown.
Going to communist countries.
He's lucky he didn't get drowned or eaten by sharks, right? In the course of, I mean, can you imagine trying to swim that far? I mean, over 40,000 people have died from it. And one more thing on Castro, which is one of the reasons we really wanted him in here in this series. He wanted to launch the nukes during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And when Nikita Khrushchev found that out, he called a late Sunday night session at the Kremlin and said, get the nukes out, get them out now, get them out now, get them out now, get them out now. Fidel and Che both wanted to fire the nukes. If they had done that, then we would have fired on the Soviet Union. Soviet Union would have fired on the U.S. Warsaw Pact would have gotten into this, and NATO, Western Europe, Eastern Europe. I mean, this would have been the nuclear holocaust that everybody feared. That would have made Castro the biggest killer ever, at least in terms of what he would have precipitated. So Castro very much belongs on this list. And if you lefties listening, right, think it's so great in Cuba, go live there. All right, go. In fact, I'll help you out. I'll pay for your plane ticket. I'll pay for your raft.
Yeah,
Start
that
swimming.
and talk to any of the people, the dissidents, you could say, who have actually lived in these countries. Because
Right.
there are plenty of them, and they all would say the same thing, and it's not positive. So it's crazy stuff. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us this week. We've talked about and put on the screen throughout the episode these videos that you can go and check out, and we encourage you to do so, but we'll also link them in the article that's associated at spectator.org. So make sure that you go to spectator.org to read more about this and to check out all of the other great reporting that we have. And make sure that you share this with your friends. I would say share this with the young people in your life because they're not teaching it in schools, that's for sure. But it's so great that you joined us this week. We're looking forward to seeing you next week.
Grazie, Grace. And I would add, go to faithandfreedom.com for the Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College, and give the website for Restoration, your organization.
Yeah, Restoration of America. Go look that up too. That's where I work, and it's an excellent company. You could check out Restoration of America, or you could check out Restoration News. Great companies, and we're happy to all kind of be able to work together and collaborate. And yes, definitely check out the Institute for Faith and Freedom. That has been such an impactful part of my life.
Amen. I shall see you next week.
See you next week.